Drugs worth nearly 100 million euros have been seized in Africa and the Middle East during a large international police operation in March and April. Interpol says that the bust was a result of a close working relationship with customs and police officials from 41 countries. It says that at least 287 people have been arrested on the African continent and in the Middle East. Well, joining us for a little bit more on this is senior researcher at the Institute for Security Studies, Martin Erwi. Martin, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, and good evening to the viewers.
This sounds like a pretty incredible operation, transcontinent, across many territories. Is that how problematic the drug problem and illicit drug problem is on the continent?
It is indeed, and it takes Interpol, this cooperation with 41 countries to be able to seize this much. Whenever we have such a seizure, the question is, how many more did it pass? Because we always believe that for every one seizure, 10 have passed by. Which means that what we are seeing might just be a tip of the iceberg. The situation, it's a lot worse, and we know that last year when the lockdown was extremely tight, we didn't have a lot of movement with the traffickers, but with the relax in the lockdown and in COVID conditions, I think they have started, and I'm very, very happy that Interpol is stepping up the fight. But they don't need to stop here because there's a lot more that they can do.
What is it about the continent that makes us vulnerable? Do we have porous borders? Is it corruption at customs? What is going on?
Well, indeed, our security is not the best. We also suffer from very chronic corruption. If you look at the Niger shipment, you realize that it came from at least 2 other countries, which means that, the police in those countries were not able to stop them. And that's the problem, because in Africa, corruption is a big, big problem. It is really what is facilitating transnational organized crime. And we have countries which are not also taking the issue seriously to control their borders and make sure that they check. The shipment in Niger actually passed through at least 2 borders where police were there, and yet they failed to stop the shipment from passing through. And remember, this shipment is coming all the way from Lebanon, which means that, it has crossed a lot of borders before getting to Niger. But we thank God that it was finally stopped. But I can tell you it's a route that is very common, and there are a lot more that had actually passed through that route.
I mean, when we look at some of the sizes of the drugs that are being seized, for example, South Africa police seized 973 cocaine bricks worth 32 million euros. I mean, that is an enormous size. The brazenness to want to try and move this amount in one shot either means that you're very confident that along your supply line that you are protected.
Yes, and this particular shipment, I'm glad that it was stopped because it was a direct one. But if you look at some of the ones that have been stopped, especially in Durban, where we started seeing cocaine in capsules, which is extremely concerning, because when you have capsules like that, you can mistake them for medicine, for pharmaceutical drug. But which means that the traffickers are each day becoming ingenious in terms of how they want to ferry their drugs across, borders. So the law enforcement agencies, they need to wake up. I don't think that the police alone is enough to deal with the problem. We need drug law enforcement agencies. We need intelligence to be able to detect these traffickers, without which I don't think that we can make any headway in this problem. When we get one seizure or two, like the ones we have now, we rejoice over it as if we have stopped the whole industry. We have only scratched the surface. There's a lot more to come.
Do we have an idea of the original source of some of these drugs and where the actual kingpins sit? Because I'm suspecting that on the continent we're dealing with local kings, almost like your distributors, more than the actual ringleaders.
Yes, you see that many of the drugs that have been stopped, the cocaine in South Africa, the cannabis in Niger, these were drugs that were actually in transit. In Niger, we know that they were heading to Libya. And we also know that in Libya, they can find their way to Europe. And it's the same track for the drugs. So we know that, when it comes to cocaine, the source remain Latin America, where, cocaine is being shipped. But if you look at that coast of Durban, which is part of the East African coast, linking Mozambique, Somalia, Mombasa, those places, the cocaine there, and especially heroin, which is a lot more common in that part of Africa. The heroin is coming all the way from Afghanistan. It passes through countries like Pakistan, then heading towards the Middle East, and then finds its way to the Horn of Africa, through the east coast of Africa to the southern part, and then head back to the north, where it finally finds its way to Europe. So we know the source where these drugs are coming from. But it has been difficult, to stop it, because the traffickers are becoming everyday engineers. They're becoming very innovative in how they do their trade, making it extremely difficult. And as I've said, that our law enforcement agencies, some of them are also complacent, especially those that are very, very corrupt. If we can eliminate corruption, I think it will break the doors for us to be able to stop these drugs before they get to where they are supposed to.
With all of these drugs that seem to be moving through the continent, are we seeing an increasing problem with the types of drugs that are available and being consumed? I think traditionally cannabis was perhaps one of our choice drugs and widely distributed across the continent. But are some of these other more expensive designer drugs starting to make headway on the continent as well?
You are right. Cannabis, it's a little more complicated because this is drugs that it's also grown in Africa. It's one of the most common drugs that you'll find in every part of the continent. So that one is very, very common, which is why I was a little surprised that the shipment in Niger came all the way from Lebanon. I don't know why. Maybe they packaged it there, or for some reason, it must have just been the route, because sometimes they can take very, very complicated routes, which they believe can guarantee success for the drugs to go through. So it doesn't mean that these were actually produced in Africa. They may have just been used because of the route. The Sahel, as we know it, has been a corridor for drug trafficking, especially drugs heading to Europe. So when you seize drugs in countries like Niger, in Mauritania, in Mali, these drugs are mostly there on transit. The final destination most often is Europe. For this particular one in Niger, that we are told that it was heading to Libya, we know that the final destination will certainly be Europe. But we have seen an increase in these drugs. I think a couple of days also, a laboratory producing drugs in Cote d'Ivoire was also discovered, especially this falsified pharmaceutical drugs. It was really, really huge, laboratory that was discovered a couple of days ago. And you can see how these traffickers, these criminals are fabricating all types of medicine, including vaccines, that you inject into your body, which means that a lot of the medicine that will be circulating are medicine that's falsified, which is could actually add more diseases to people rather than cure them. So the problem is really serious, and I think that our law enforcement agencies and us, for us also researchers, I think we need to step up our game to be able to detect these drugs a lot more earlier. I would say that for the other drugs that you mentioned, the synthetic drugs, which we know it's also becoming extremely common, especially with terrorist groups, with gangs, and so on, who need some of these very wide drugs for all sort of reasons. These drugs, again, are becoming the first choice because they provide instant high, as they call
Yeah.
it. And, a lot of young people are consuming these drugs, and we've seen the health impact, the social impact that these drugs have on our society. We hope that we can step up our fight against these drugs and be able to stop them before they really get into the minds of our youth.